All right, Raider Nation, NFL YouTube, what is going on? We are here with the one and only, the legend, Brian Tuohy of thefixesin.net. If you haven't checked that out, man, check out his site. He breaks down pretty much all sports and talks about, a huge concern that we all have, which is, are they rigged, right? And
Yep.
I could assume your answer is yes to most of that. And you've written extensively about the NFL. And for me in particular, I have always been sort of neutral on this issue. But in recent time, the Jon Gruden situation that happened with the Raiders, his immediate firing, the Washington football team investigation, 650,000 emails out. We only get Jon Gruden's emails out of all those, right? And so I have sort of, I've become skeptical. And so I thought, who better to talk to than Brian Tuohy of thefixesin.net. So I want to just get your initial thoughts. Like, what do you think is behind the Jon Gruden email situation? Do you think this is an element of fixing? Is this a targeted job against Gruden? I just want to know what's your opinion on that whole situation.
I lean toward that, from at least the information that I've heard regarding the whole situation, because it makes no sense. I mean, it makes no sense that they collected 650,000 emails, and the only ones that managed to leak out were the ones specific about Jon Gruden, and apparently very specific about him using inappropriate language so bad that, he had to resign or be fired or whatever the actual case was. And at the same time, all the emails that related to the actual investigation of what was going on with the Washington football team, nobody knows. Nobody knows what's in any of those. And so it seems very targeted. And what I always talk about when I talk about sports is you have to remember you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar business in the NFL. So it's not, it's not the government. It's not, you can't do a Freedom of Information Act request to get the emails. It's what the business wants to release to the public. That's what's going to be released to the public. And if it was just this leak, why was it just a specific leak about Jon Gruden? Why was it just so targeted to him if it wasn't really out to get him? And that's what it did. It got him right out of the team for whatever reason. The problem is the why behind it all is still really open for debate and question.
Right. And I think that's what's so frustrating for most Raider fans is it almost feels like because these investigations are conducted by the NFL, it's not the state. They're basically doing their own investigation and concluding that they did everything fine, right? Everything's smooth sailing.
Well, that's always the bizarre thing. I mean, not to totally shift topics, but that if you heard about Evander Kane, the hockey player, whose wife came out and said, hey, look, this guy was betting on NHL games. He was also fixing NHL games. And, supposedly the NHL did an investigation into this, which lasted like a week, 2 weeks. And of course, they came back and said, oh, no, there's nothing going on. We found no evidence of that. Well, who did you talk to? Who did the investigation? How far did it go? Because you summed it up really quickly in a matter of, like I say, days after this report came out. And it's the same with Jon Gruden's in his email. Instantly, the NFL's like, well, that's all there is. There's nothing to see, move on.
Right.
And, of course, it's going to leave fans going, well, what the heck happened? But that's every investigation the NFL does into itself. You can't let a business investigate itself. Do you believe when Facebook says, well, we looked into it and we found Facebook, we did nothing wrong? Everybody would go, well, I don't believe that. But that's what happens. And that's what the NFL is doing. And that's what Major League Baseball does. And all these leagues do is we investigated ourselves and we found we did nothing wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of peculiar because one thing about the Gruden email is that people, do talk about in the media, but it's always left out is the fact that he said expletives about Roger Goodell. Now, just from your opinion, researching the NFL and everything, how much power does Goodell actually have? I mean, some people say the owners have more power than Goodell. Other people disagree. What's your take on Goodell, his history, and his impact and influence on the NFL?
I would agree with the people who say the owners have the power because Goodell, to me, is their lapdog. He's their figurehead. He does what they tell him to do. And so the owners have all the power. They have all the sway. They have all the influence. Now, it doesn't mean that it's all 32 are on the same team at all times. I mean, obviously, there can be factions within that group that says, hey, we want to do this, while their side says we want to do that. And Goodell maybe has some input into it, but I think that's why he stuck around as long as he has. Because, I mean, the guy comes out at the NFL draft and he gets booed. He comes out at the end of the Super Bowl, they hand out the trophy and he gets booed. And people are like, well, why do they keep this guy around? Well, there's a very specific reason. It's because he's doing exactly what the owners want. And so that's the thing is, I mean, even though those emails maybe talk negative about Goodell, if the owners wanted Goodell gone, he'd be gone tomorrow. And
Right.
that's what it boils down to. The power doesn't, even though it kind of seems like, I think to a lot of NFL fans that he is the supreme power, he's not. He's just a figurehead.
Right.
And that's what a lot of people have to move past is it's really the owners are in control of this league because they own it. They literally own it. And so, if they want somebody gone, like in this case, perhaps Gruden, they'll get rid of him.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly what happened, unfortunately. But it is good to keep that in mind that Goodell is kind of just like, a face because people are going anti-Goodell, but hey, who's really behind Goodell, right?
Well, and I think too, I find it really funny that with Gruden, the whole uproar of him getting fired or resigned or whatever exactly happened, who's to say behind closed doors, but immediately the Raiders win the next 2 games. And so now, I mean, how many Raider fans are kind of like, God, it really sucked that Goodell got fired. Now they're like, well, we won the last 2 games.
No, that's exactly what's happening.
He's gone. So now who cares about his emails, what he said, what else is being said? It's just really easy to just move past it because they won. And so, in my opinion, the conspiracy thing is, did the NFL create those victories for the Raiders to make this all go away?
And people get really upset when you say that. And this comment I'm highlighting, Valerie Lynn, rigged or not, I'm happy we're getting wins and hope they continue. So that perfectly...
See, that's just it. And that's the thing that kind of bothers me and why I write about what I do is because as a fan, if games are being manipulated, even if they're being manipulated in your favor, that should upset you because then you're not watching football. You're watching basically professional wrestling disguised as football. And that's what I argue really the NFL is and all major league sports are, is they're really entertainment and their business is entertainment. The games are their product and they have the very real ability to manipulate them, legally manipulate these games to get outcomes they want. And they'll do it because at the end of the day, it's all about money.
Right. No, that's totally true. And I mean, I think that's the crux, of your argument and the reason why people disagree with you. Because I've watched videos of you on other shows, Dan Patrick's show and all kinds of stuff like that. And if you have not checked out, by the way, I just want to plug this guy, thefixesin.net, Brian Tuohy. Check it out if you're watching right now. And check out his latest updates. You're always updating your page, your blog on the NFL. But I do want to say,
by the way,
go ahead.
This is water. It's not vodka. Just want to point that out.
We don't mind vodka on this channel. Don't worry.
I know, but when you're a conspiracy theorist, you got to watch yourself.
Now, I think this is, and I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. I think this is where people disagree with you is they say, well, at a certain point, people have to do well. So for instance, the Raiders won these past 2 games. I tend to sort of lean with you, where I think they got some favorable calls, although they still had to play well, right? The quarterback still had to make some accurate calls. So what is the balance in which you think a game is rigged? Are they completely rigged? Is there a moderate amount? Or what's your take on that?
Well, that's always, and that's where the argument lies is, is it really professional wrestling? I don't think the NFL sits down each week and says, okay, we're going to check this box because this team's going to win, this team's going to win, this team's going to win. And we're going to do it for the entire season. And we're going to pick who we want in the Super Bowl in preseason. I don't think that happens. I think what happens is the NFL, and again, I think it happens in the NBA, the NHL, all these leagues, is I think what they see is certain storylines naturally merge. And then they push those storylines if they can, if they see that's what the fans want or that's what the media is talking about, then they will give them the story they want. And at the same time, they have certain star athletes, like in the NFL, certain quarterbacks like Tom Brady, like Aaron Rodgers, who always get the beneficial calls. And I don't think that's an accident. It's the same in the NBA. It's not an accident. So when you see, certain guys always do well, like the Tom Brady's do well, that's partially because, one, they know that's what drives rating. Quarterbacks drives the television ratings. That's where the NFL makes all its money is from television. And 2, if you want that star to then keep drawing in the fans, you're going to have them do well or at least be protected more. So therefore, you allow their offensive line to get away with more holding. You allow them maybe occasionally to get a beneficial call here or there. And it doesn't necessarily mean the NFL is fixing the game so Tom Brady wins. But if you give his offensive line more room to create, have do holding and not get called for it, or to get more offensive or defensive pass interference called in their favor, then it is going to sway the game slightly and probably just enough to make sure that Tom Brady does win. So like I say, they're not going out to fix it for Tom Brady and the Buccaneers to win. But at the same time, those little give and take calls are enough to push them over the top or at least lean the game in his favor. And like you said, at certain times, they still have to perform. I mean, if Tom Brady goes out and throws 3 interceptions, you can only throw so many flags before your people are like, whoa, that was really weird. But at the same time, like if you're a gambler and you get that little bit of an edge, you're going to take it because it's going to be more beneficial in the long run for you. And I think that's what happens with these leagues is the referees will go out and ensure these certain players get more beneficial calls that give them a little more leeway to do what they do. And in the end, they do wind up winning more games. They do wind up going to the playoffs. And, for the NFL, that's a great thing.
Right. You have to protect the talent. That is interesting. It is quite rare that you see someone like Brady or Rodgers even get seriously injured. I mean, obviously it happens, but there is some type of protection that happens.
Well, I mean, look at Cam Newton, just a few years ago, and they pointed out how often that guy would just get destroyed by defensive linemen. And there was never a call for, roughing the passer against him. It was like the NFL could care less what happened to him. But other quarterbacks, I mean, just was it Kyler Murray just like 2 weeks ago?
Let's actually
he got slightly pushed after the game or after a play, and it was, roughing the passer, and that was not roughing the passer. I don't care what you say.
Exactly.
So those are the little things they're protecting Kyler Murray because, again, he's becoming a star. Give him a little more room to operate, and then they're undefeated.
And this is from your website, referencing that same Kyler Murray thing. This is roughing the passer now, guys, is what this says. And when you watch this video, the fact that this was called for roughing the passer.
Yeah, I mean, that's
insane.
It's a love tap. And like I say, you go back and watch some of the things that happened to like a guy like Cam Newton, and they were never flagged for it. So, I think, and I don't think that's an accident. You could chalk up a play or two to, okay, the official missed that call or that was bad officiating or whatever. But when you could put a whole bunch of things together and it all leans in one player's favor or against another player or team, then, that trend is not accidental. It's intentional. And again, when the league can do this legally, and that's the main thing I try to tell people is, look, they can legally fix their own games while you watch them, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's perfectly legal. It's not only, within their own rules, it's literally legal from a fraud standpoint, from a, federal crime standpoint. It's legal to rig these games, and the NFL wants to.
Yeah, because it's still considered entertainment. So, right, isn't that part of the argument where they don't necessarily have to have integrity because it is entertainment?
No, because the only laws that go against this are a law that goes back to quiz shows, which says you cannot fix an intellectual contest like Jeopardy. You couldn't fix Jeopardy, but you could fix Survivor because it's not an intellectual contest. It's a physical contest. The same goes for the NFL. And the only federal law that exists about game fixing relates to bribery. And it says you cannot bribe like a player, an athlete, or a referee to alter the outcome of a game. But if you're the NFL and you tell the referees, hey, this is how we want you to go out and officiate a game, and it goes against everything that's in the NFL rulebook, it doesn't matter because they're not bribing these guys to do that. And they can even do the same thing with players. If certain players or coaches are willing to play along, which I'm sure some are, you can tell them, hey, we need this to happen. We want that to happen. They can go out and do it, and it's fixing a game, but it's not illegal.
Right. And I think when we talk about fixing, obviously the referee has so much to do with that. And what's very odd that I've noticed is that you're as a player or a coach, you're actually not allowed to criticize officiating publicly, right? You'll be fined money for that.
Exactly.
And now just, I started watching football in the 2000s, right? And so the way that I'm wondering from your perspective, do you think that the refs used to have less of an impact on the game, say 20 years ago compared to now? What does it look like from your perspective? Have there been things that have changed where you think they impact the game more than ever?
Not necessarily. I mean, I honestly think really the first football game of note that was fixed was Super Bowl III, which you go back to 1969. So, I mean, I think they've always had this in their pocket, the NFL, the ability to do it. Now, again, I don't think every game is fixed. I don't think it happens all the time. I think more often than not, what happens are games are manipulated. And that means that they're not necessarily fixed to make sure this team beats that team, but they're kind of officiated in a way or played in a way to make sure that it's close into the fourth quarter. So people keep watching. And if you look at primetime games and even Super Bowls in the past 10, 15 years, you will see that there are a lot more close contests in those matchups than ever before in NFL history. And I don't think that's an accident because it's all about television. But I think the biggest impact on officiating has been, television itself and the instant replay. And at the same time, I think that's the one clue fans should pick up on as that this is occurring is when you can sit home and watch on your 60-inch HD screen that a player was clearly in bounds or whatever, and the official will go into replay, come back out and say, you know what, we've reviewed the play and he's out of bounds. How do you get it that wrong? When you have instant replay there to make sure it's right and you still get it 100% wrong, a lot of times I think that's intentional. That's not an accident. They're talking to NFL HQ, getting the orders from the headquarters and saying, look, we need this to happen because we need that to happen. And then they make a really horrible call, regardless of what you see on your TV screen. And they just walk away from it like, oh, well.
Right. And just piggybacking on what you were saying, I noticed this in your writing on the 2021 season, talking about week 5 in the NFL, including close games, thrilling comebacks, et cetera, there have been 18 games with a game-winning score in the final minute of regulation or OT, the most such through week 5 of all time. So this year, according
to... I was not to interrupt, but I think now it's up to like 24, 27 games through week 7, which is ridiculous.
And being a Raiders fan, I believe we have had, almost 3 games go into overtime. At this point, we've already had 2 overtime games, which was just insane. I never, noticed that happen previously. One thing that I do want to bring up, since we're already here, is just talking about talking about instant replay and this new thing that's going on. I believe you referred to it as the eye in the sky, right? And so maybe you can just explain to the viewers what that is. And here's a little info about it. The league added an eye in the sky this season. This is where it is on your website. So tell the viewers, what is this eye in the sky thing and why should they be worried about it?
Well, the NFL to kind of, and it's really strange how they did this, to basically aid in instant replay and it's still, takes place at NFL headquarters. It's not in each individual stadium, but they basically have an official watching the game as it's played who can somehow basically, telephone, I shouldn't say telephone, I should contact the referees on the field and say, hey, look, we need to look at this play again. And they'll kind of like almost do an instant replay and check it out and see if, somebody was down at a certain point or inbounds or out of bounds without having a coach to challenge the play at hand. And that's the weird part of it all is, they automatically review every turnover. They automatically review every scoring play. But now they're kind of selectively going over, individual plays, not every play. And not always if a guy's inbounds or out of bounds or if it was, this, that, or the other thing. So there still has to be coaching challenges. But at the same time, now they have this eye in the sky that's kind of watching what the officials are doing and, checking with them and alerting them to certain things instantly. And so now you have this kind of big brotherish system involved in the NFL watching everything that goes on, but it doesn't always activate when it should, because otherwise then you wouldn't need coaches' challenges.
And isn't that also meant to, speed up the process so where the viewer doesn't have to actually watch the play?
Exactly.
So that's another huge
that's
thing.
part of it too. Yeah.
Yeah. Because whenever they don't show me a play, I always assume there's something they didn't want me to see. And then why is it always a very bad camera angle for every single instant replay? You ever notice that? It's like grainy footage and everything.
You're right. That is kind of weird sometimes. It's like they don't have a camera on that play, or at least, like you say, the best camera covering that specific instance. But yet, either they'll bypass it or show it to you, even though it's a terrible, picture of what just happened.
And so, like, in your opinion, because you say you don't think it's entirely rigged or whatnot, but you do think there's key games and whatnot where there's, definitely some influence there. Is there a game that sticks out to you maybe this year that you think was clearly fixed in your opinion? Or is there a certain team that you think you've seen get like a lot of benefits of these calls this year?
Well, I think a lot of it, again, I don't watch a lot of football anymore. I can't. Right. I can't watch sports because to me, it's like watching a movie. It's just kind of entertainment. It's great to have on in the background, but to actually sit there and watch it is not something I can do. I thought it was really interesting. The week before, the Thursday night game between the Buccaneers and Eagles, which was I mean, everybody pretty much knew the Buccaneers were going to kill the Eagles, and yet it still basically came down to the final, like 2 or 3 minutes of the game, where it was determined that the Buccaneers were going to win. But it was funny because it seemed like Tom Brady stopped playing in the second half. Like somebody told him at halftime, "Hey, dude, lighten up because we need people to keep watching, especially because baseball playoffs are on at the same time." And Brady just started throwing the ball at people's feet or throwing it over their heads, which he hadn't been doing the entire first half, and it hadn't been doing the entire season, in fact. But now suddenly against the Eagles, he just like failed to operate enough for the Eagles to come back and make it just interesting enough that would keep people who are watching the game watching until the very end. And then even the Eagles did that crazy 2-point conversion, which they didn't need to because they were down 14 at the time. And that really helped the betting public because the Eagles wound up covering the point spread because they converted that 2-point conversion, which they really didn't need to go for, but they did anyway and converted it as it was. So, I mean, I thought that game was really strange. It just didn't feel right.
Right.
And maybe it wasn't fixed, but it still just had that feeling of something weird's going on here. And I think that a lot of NFL fans, if you watch enough football in the course of your lifetime, you can sense that with certain games. It's like, what the heck is going on? Because this just isn't going right. But yet here we are.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I mean, that begs the question, though, like, who do you think is behind the rigging? I mean, we've mentioned the refs and then maybe like the leadership in the NFL more generally. But do you think players, and have there been players historically, at least in recent time, who have been behind on the rigging, in your opinion?
I'm sure there are. Now, for me to really say, oh, this player was definitely involved, no, I don't have that proof. If I had that proof, I'd probably be dead or I'd be really famous. It'd be one or the other. I don't know which. But I mean, I think I take a guy like Peyton Manning, who's a huge name, and was an NFL dude forever. But he seemed like a real, what you would call a company man. Like he was a guy that for whatever reason, he would get in the playoffs. He was a great quarterback, but there were certain games where he just would fall apart and certain plays where he just fell apart. And at the same time, after he would fall apart like that, he was still rewarded in a way with 2 Super Bowls. In fact, he was one of the few players. He won Super Bowl 50 and immediately retired. And it was just like this giant storybook ending to his career. And in a way, to me, because I had seen him, I think, my opinion, he threw the Super Bowl when he was with the Colts when they played the Saints. And that kind of culminated that whole Hurricane Katrina, the Saints rebuilt the city of New Orleans storyline. And Peyton Manning was from New Orleans. I mean, his dad was Archie Manning. He was the quarterback of the New Orleans Saints. He had more connection to the city of New Orleans than Drew Brees ever did. And he was terrible in that Super Bowl. He threw basically the game-winning interception right to the Saints quarterback to score for a touchdown. And then he was rewarded with this, dramatic send-off at the end of Super Bowl 50. I think that was the guy who was maybe playing for the NFL. That I don't know if they necessarily had something on him. I mean, of course, he did have that whole thing about, performance-enhancing drugs being shipped to his wife after his, neck surgery, which was proven. But yet he was allowed back in the NFL. He wasn't tested, apparently. But, I mean, I think that's a guy who you could look at and say, well, yeah, he was a superstar. He had a great career. But there were some weird things that happened in his career. And at the same time, the weird things he benefited in the end at the same time with certain rewards. And I think that's a guy, and that's a situation where it's possible it happened. I could be 100% wrong. Right. Maybe it was all just the way it happened. But to me, it's a little interesting, to say the least.
It's always like you always have to be skeptical when it's a little too perfect, right? The way that he was sent off.
And that's exactly it, because, again, this is entertainment. The NFL admitted before the Supreme Court that they're entertainment, first and foremost. So when all their money, I shouldn't say all their money, but 60% of the revenue the NFL makes is directly from television, and it's billions upon billions of dollars, you have to make a production. I mean, basically, ESPN, which is owned by Walt Disney, spends $100 million on every Monday Night Football game. $100 million. How many $100 million movies does Disney produce in a year? Right. 12, maybe? Right. Maybe one a month? But here they're producing 17 a year on Monday Night Football. And you don't think that there's certain guarantees with that $100 million a week? You don't think that they're guaranteed to get certain teams, to get certain outcomes, to get certain exciting games? Because you're not going to invest $100 million to lose $60 million. You're going to invest $100 million to make that money back. And the way you're going to make it back is through advertising. And the only way you make it through advertising is people are going to sit there and watch the game from beginning to end every week. And to do that, you almost, like I say, you have to make sure they watch to the very end, which means, in my opinion, you have to manipulate these games to make sure they're interesting.
Right. Advertisers aren't going to pay top dollar when they're punting and kicking field goals the whole game, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, occasionally you're going to get a dud, of course.
Right.
You know, occasionally you get a blowout. Certain things you just can't control. But for the most part, again, on primetime games, that doesn't happen very often.
Well, I think that's where people would push back. They would say, hey, I've seen games where, there's a dud. Now, I go back to the Rams and Patriots Super Bowl fairly recently. I mean, that game you could say was a dud. So,
true.
I mean,
again,
how do you explain that to people? Yeah.
If every year the Super Bowl came down to the last 30 seconds and someone kicks a game-winning field goal, after a while, wouldn't you be like, come on, every time this happens, every time, every Super Bowl, this is what happens? No, I mean, certain things, like this past week in the NFL, most of the games were blowouts. Most of the games weren't close. They weren't interesting.
Right.
And that just kind of happens. And I mean, I have, not to, again, kind of change subjects, but from researching game fixing from like an FBI files that I obtained, I remember specifically there was one FBI file where they talked about certain, I think it was the LA Rams games, like back in the 1960s, early 1970s. They said they were attempting to fix them and probably did fix one or two games, but one game they couldn't fix because it was just wound up being a blowout. And the guys trying to control the game had no opportunity to control the game because just that's the way it went. And I think that's the way with certain NFL games, NBA games. Sometimes, you get fumbles that you can't control. You get interceptions that are just blatantly thrown. You just get bad breaks. And so the guys attempting to manipulate the game can only do so much before it's blatantly obvious. And that's the last thing you want.
So for those NFL fans watching right now, there's still a glimmer of hope that a team could persevere beyond the rigging from your perspective.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, this is the Raiders broadcast. So, I mean, to be honest, I think the Raiders have a very good shot of winning the Super Bowl in the next couple of years. And I think it all boils down to the stadium and moving to Las Vegas. Because the NFL seems to reward teams that either build new multi-billion-dollar stadiums or move to a new fan base. And I mean, I don't think that's a coincidence. And I have it on my website somewhere where I list all the teams in the NFL when they got a new stadium or when they relocated or got a renovation of their stadium and how soon afterwards they, managed to either get in the Super Bowl or win a Super Bowl. And it's way more, it happens way more than you think, more than you believe, actually.
Right. I saw that post that you made, and it makes me think of San Francisco going to the Super Bowl recently when they moved to Santa Clara. That's a recent example of that. I know the Chiefs, when they went on their run, they had upgrades to their stadium. They didn't move their stadium, but they had huge upgrades. But at a certain point, you would say the team still has to perform well. However, I'm wondering from your perspective, do you think the fact that there's a salary cap in the NFL very different to other sports, where it makes every team kind of equal? Would you agree with that?
Well, the NFL has always wanted that. I mean, if you go back to the 1960s, Pete Rozelle, who was the first real commissioner of the NFL, he wanted something that he called parity, which meant that basically on any given Sunday, any team could beat any other team. To try to make the league as even as possible, which is why the draft is arranged the way it is. And now the salary cap exists to try to make every team the same. And so I think that's also a great thing to hide behind, though, because if you are manipulating games and you do want to make sure certain outcomes happen, well, then if you have this mantra that's been going on for over 50 years that says on any given Sunday, any team could beat any team. Well, then if you manipulate or fix a game to make sure this underdog becomes a Cinderella story and defeats this other team, well, then that just goes right into what the NFL has been telling you for 50 years. This can happen at any time. So it's not a surprise. So I think, it's great in a way, but at the same time, it's a perfect thing to hide behind if you're the NFL manipulating games.
Right. And just going back, because I didn't want to skip that point that you made, and I kind of did by pivoting with that question about, the Raiders having a good chance to make the Super Bowl this year and next year. Yeah. I had similar thoughts. Obviously, I thought the team had a lot of impact with that, but I did think about this new stadium and how they've been unsuccessful in Oakland for so long. And then I did think about how the NFL needs to cover their costs. And then the first game of this year against the Ravens on Monday Night Football, Roger Goodell was at that game, right? And it was sold out. It looked amazing. Like, wow, they could make so much money off of that. What, Ludacris is performing there, Chris Angel's there, all kinds of weird crap. Now, do you think...
I mean, sorry, not to interrupt, but I mean, also look at Las Vegas Golden Knights in hockey, which I think was even a more manipulated and a more crazy story. But here, you're the first, professional sports franchise in Las Vegas as an expansion team, and they made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. I don't think that was an accident. I mean, you have to remember the guy who owns that team had to pony up, I think it was $500 million just to become part of the NHL, which $500 million was more than NBC at the time paid for a year's worth of NHL hockey to broadcast. And you don't think that $500 million came with something, again, attached to the back end of it? I mean, that team was an immediate success in that town. That town went nuts for the Golden Knights, a town that had no interest in hockey ever before. And it went insane because I was actually out there by coincidence right during their playoff run. I mean, the town was nuts for it. And so I think here's the same thing with the Raiders. I mean, all of a sudden they come in, they got this new, huge, beautiful stadium. They couldn't play in front of fans last year. So really, last year didn't really matter. But now this year, when they could sell tickets, get everybody in there, it's a totally different story. And here the team's 5-2. I mean, again, I don't find that to be completely accidental. I don't believe in coincidences when there's millions and billions of dollars attached to them.
And that's why I think the timing of the Gruden emails is even more important, in my opinion, because, I mean, yes, they have to make money in Vegas. They have to be successful, like you're saying, for the NFL's interest, right? Just to cover these expenses. And the fact that Gruden gets removed in a time when you say it's this year or next year that they got to be in the Super Bowl, right? I mean, that's
within the next year or two or three, maybe. But yeah, I mean, now's their window.
But when they remove Gruden this year, I mean, from the outset, if you're just kind of a naive sports fan, you would say, well, this undermines their chances to make the Super Bowl. I don't think there's ever been an interim head coach who's made the Super Bowl in the past 20 years that I know of, right? You know what I mean?
Which is a great story, though, isn't it?
That is a great story.
I mean, that'd be a great story to push for the league. Look, here's a guy who came out of nowhere, pushed into this role, and here, look at the Raiders just blow. I mean, they may not even make the Super Bowl, but right. I think they're definitely in the playoffs. And to make like a championship game or something, again, wouldn't shock me at all.
Divisional or AFC championship game.
And it's not based at all on the talent on the roster. I think it's all based on things outside the sport, or I should say outside the actual play on the field, that's going to influence what may happen.
Right. And I wonder too, like, I don't know if things are this petty, right? Like we talked about Gruden getting fired before, like whether or not maybe it's Goodell having a vendetta against him. We don't really actually know, right? We're probably never going to know.
You know what? Yeah, exactly. We'll never know.
But he can't reap the glory that they need to happen in Vegas. I think that is something behind targeting Gruden. I don't know what you think about that. That's just me giving my opinion to the viewers in some way. But
if the Raiders, just for example, if they did win the Super Bowl, wouldn't technically Gruden get a Super Bowl ring?
I don't know how that works if you resign.
I mean, if you're on a team and you get traded, I think you still get a Super Bowl ring.
Really?
I mean, if you were on the Raiders now and you got traded to whoever, the Eagles, I think because you played on that team and they wound up winning the Super Bowl, you'd still get a ring or the opportunity to get a ring. I think because you were on the team.
So it could be unrelated. The Raiders' success this year, next year, could be unrelated to the Gruden situation too.
But I still find it really odd. The whole Gruden email, the timing of it all, and what's transpired it doesn't make sense. Like I say, it's funny now. Congress is supposedly going to get involved, right?
Yeah,
and they're gonna do nothing.
Yeah. Do I trust the House Democrats? Yeah.
Well, just go back to baseball and steroids in Congress. I mean, they guys literally lying. I mean, McGuire and Sosa literally lying to the faces of congressmen and getting zero repercussions from it, and baseball didn't change. So, I mean, there's actually, I've read reporters on Twitter who are all excited. Oh, Congress is going to get involved. I'm like, you idiots. They're not going to do anything.
Yeah.
They're not going to reveal anything. And even if they did, they're just going to flat out lie to Congress, and Congress can go, okay, fine, great. And that's going to be it. I mean, the only thing potential is if Gruden, for some reason, would sue over all this, then maybe something will happen. But they'll pay him off, and he won't sue.
Yeah, it would be David going against Goliath in that situation.
Or he'd have a heart attack and you would, heart attack and you'd disappear.
Oh, yeah. Commit suicide, right? Some people say.
Exactly.
And I mean, that's something that's interesting. The fact that there are no fans this past year. And then you were talking about performance enhancing drugs and how I believe it was Peyton Manning you said wasn't tested. That after
Well,
he
I mean,
came
like I say, they knew they had, I think it was HGH that was delivered to his house,
right.
addressed to his wife. Like, really, his wife's taking it?
Yeah, she's
and he's just coming off this major neck surgery? Sure. Okay. Believe that.
So isn't this interesting that the NFL could test every player and coach and staff member of COVID on almost a daily basis last year?
Yeah.
But they can't test every player for PEDs. So do you think they turn, what do you think with PEDs? Do you think it's just straight up allowed by the NFL just from what you've read and researched, or do you think it's selectively allowed for certain teams?
I think it's allowed widespread. I mean, if you look at these guys, I mean, they're bigger, stronger, and faster than anything. I mean, I don't think it's natural. I mean, I know people seem to be getting larger as it is, in terms of height and weight. I mean, I go into high schools and I feel like I'm a junior high kid, despite the fact that I'm pushing 50, because all these kids are, 6 feet, 6'4", 200 pounds. I mean, they're huge. But I don't think, for what they have to go through in terms of punishment on the field, training, and that sort of thing, they all have to be on something. And I mean, Tom Brady to be playing when he's 44. I mean, Tom Brady's like 4 years younger than me. He looks like he's 20 years younger than me. He's in better shape than I am. And it's like, there's no way that dude could be playing football and just be doing the TB12 method. Come on. And even if he's a guy specifically, if he's on whatever he's on, and I'm sure he's on something, is the NFL really going to bust him for it? Are they really going to come out and say, hey, yeah, we tested him and he's filled with all these PEDs and HGH? And all? No, they're going to keep that totally quiet. And I think that's what happens with a lot of these guys is they know when they're going to get tested. They get a warning, and they're on stuff that the NFL isn't testing for because the Players Association makes sure they don't test for it. I mean, HGH, they said, was probably at least 75% of the league players run before they were testing for it. And then they initiated HGH testing, but it took like 3 years to actually kick in. Well, you got 3 years, guys, basically to find something besides HGH to use that'll work essentially the same. And I'm sure they did, because now it's some other thing they're not testing for. So the NFL could say, hey, we're testing for this, that, and the other thing. The players can all say, hey, we tested clean. At the same time, there's probably a litany of drugs that aren't being tested for. And, nobody's talking about that part of
it all. Right. Yeah. And at the same time, like I was mentioning, the COVID testing is just, it's easy. And it was a completely new virus, right? And they're able to deploy it.
And who's to say they really were testing all those guys?
That's what I was going to ask you, because I've seen situations where people get out because of COVID. Do you think there's something behind that COVID testing targeting? But what were you going to say before that? Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, drug testing in all forms, even the COVID stuff now, is a really good way to kind of blackmail players into doing things you wouldn't necessarily think they would do. I mean, just say there was some wide receiver, and they did a random test, and the guy didn't realize it was coming, and he was out partying the night before, and now he tested positive for like marijuana, cocaine, and who knows what else. Because the NFL, for example, controls everything in the testing. When they get tested, what they're tested for, they run the tests, they collect the results, they know who tested positive or negative. So the NFL could easily say, hey, look, Mr. Wide Receiver, we have you testing positive for cocaine. So what do you want to do? Do you want us to make this public? Do you want us to give you the 4-week, suspension? You lose all this money, or maybe just Sunday you don't play very well. What do you want to do? I mean, right? I mean, same thing with performance-enhancing drugs. We tested positive. Now this is the second time we've got you testing positive for steroids. We can suspend you for the year, or again, you do something for us and we make this go away. Because nobody in the general public's going to know. Nobody in the media is going to know. And it's the same thing now with COVID too. It's very easy to say, hey, player X, you tested positive for COVID. You can't play this weekend. Well, I feel fine. Yeah, but you tested positive for COVID, so you can't play this weekend. Yeah, but that might affect the team. Sorry. And so, again, you could manipulate a game in a different way. I mean, all these things are possible because, again, it's all controlled by the league. And the only reason any of that information gets out is because the league makes it come out. So it's very easy for them to sweep it under the table if they want, or make it public if they want. So, again, you have this kind of way to manipulate players if you really want to, that's wide open to the NFL to use.
Right. Yeah, totally. When you control the testing process, when you control giving the punishment out, and when you're the employer as well, you have a lot of power to sweep things under the rug. I just want to tell the viewers, feel free to ask a question for Brian, Tuohy in the chat, or both of us talking about the NFL. I mean, I know a lot of you guys have concerns. I mean, there's some emotions going on in the chat about a couple things.
Most people say I ruin sports for them. They either think I'm insane, or they say I ruin sports for them, because now you're thinking logically about what you took as entertainment, and it changes the whole thing. So I get it. And people too, if they want to email me questions and stuff, I'll always answer emails too. So they can go to my website, which is thefixesin.net, and they can email me whatever they want. They can tell me I'm an idiot, tell me I'm great. They can ask questions. I don't care. Fire away.
So I guess, like, looking at everything you've said so far, you're kind of saying that the NFL, it has to be rigged because of how much money is at stake. I mean, that's one of your premises, which I think is valid.
I'd say not manipulated is probably a better word.
Rigged
ensues that you're picking team A over team B, and I think manipulated for sure. Manipulated to keep things interesting, manipulated to help certain people succeed, and sometimes maybe rigging, but manipulated without a doubt. The rigging, yeah, I can argue that more as a conspiracy, but manipulated, sure.
Manipulate, you think it's for certain, and
it's a better word.
Better word, probably more appropriate. We have one question here. I don't know if you've seen anything related to this about all the refs being lawyers. I mean, I'm not sure. I've never seen that in particular. I read about refs being lawyers. A lot of them are, though, in your experience.
That is true, yeah. I mean, I couldn't tell you percentage, but yeah, I know, like, guys like Ed Hockley was a lawyer. There's trying to think of some of the other guys, but there were several that were lawyers. But partially because officiating or NFL officiating is a part-time job.
Right.
I mean, it pays really well, but it is a part-time job. So a lot of these guys have other backgrounds. And yeah, for some reason, there are a lot of lawyers involved, which is kind of strange.
I mean, it's kind of a legalistic job too. So, I mean, that premise about the amount of money that's involved, and from another view though, like, what do you think, in your opinion, is the common, I guess, response to you? Because you're saying you ruin football for a lot of fans, because you're trying to shed some reason on the situation. So what's the common counter argument you hear whenever you talk about the NFL being rigged, and how do you address that?
It's always somebody would talk. I mean, that's with any conspiracy theory, pretty much, right? If there was, if the NFL was fixed, there's so many players, so many coaches, so many referees, somebody sooner or later would talk, right? That's usually what I get. And here's my counter to that: is, first of all, say you're even Peyton Manning, somebody huge, and you had fixed games in the past for the NFL at their behest, and you came out to ESPN or whoever would have you. First of all, you'd have to have somebody who would have you to even say something like that. But say ESPN even had him on, and he said, "You know what? The NFL told me to fix Super Bowl, whatever it was, against the Saints, and I did." Well, the first thing you're going to say is, "Well, prove it." And Peyton Manning, his only proof is going to be, "Well, they came to me and asked me to do it." Yeah, but where's your proof of it? Well, the NFL's not going to write this stuff down. Right. They're not going to say, "Here, Peyton, sign this contract here that says you're going to fix the Super Bowl for us." So there's going to be no physical proof, really, that this happened, that a player or referee was told to fix the game. So without the proof, a lot of the people in the media aren't going to buy you, no matter what your word is, because now you're attacking a multi-billion-dollar industry and you're an individual. So, I mean, for somebody to come out, I mean, for Peyton Manning to come out, I mean, you're talking about the rest of his future with the NFL in terms of, showing up and signing autographs for $300 a crack, whatever. His whole career is, I was in the NFL, whatever player it was, a lowly punter, greatest quarterback of all time. They're an NFL player. That's their identity. And so you're asking them not only to provide proof that they probably don't have, you're asking them to destroy their entire identity. And for what? What are they going to make? What's the benefit? Right. I mean, they'd get it off their chest, but I mean, it's not like they're going to write a book and make $2 million or $1 billion writing a book or doing an interview or whatever, because again, they don't have the proof. And even if they did write a book that had a lot of things that you could kind of prove, and, he makes a really strong case that, he was involved in fixing NFL games, who's going to listen to him? If it's not on ESPN, if it's not on Sports Illustrated, Yahoo Sports, Barstool Sports, does it exist? Does anybody even know what happened in the sporting world?
Right.
And they can easily crack down on all those outlets because all of them are affiliated with the NFL. I mean, CBS, ABC, NBC, ESPN, they all give billions of dollars to the NFL, and they're going to turn around and put some lowlife on who says he was fixing NFL games. Well,
Right.
they're going to shoot themselves in the foot in their multi-billion-dollar investment. No. So, I mean, if there are people involved, you got to give me a reason why they would make this public and how they would make this public and what behooves them to make it public if they knew and were involved.
And that's one thing too. I mean, you do see certain players call out the NFL being rigged. So people like Larry Johnson and Vontez Burfict that I've
I
seen.
forgot about Larry. Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is you never have the Peyton Mannings, the people who are very successful in terms of wins. You never have those people say anything. And I think it's for the reasons like you're saying, they're benefiting from this. And
I mean, even Larry Johnson was, he was a successful football player. But again, he comes out with, he doesn't have the proof.
Yeah.
Which is the big thing. And because he's affiliated with Alex Jones or whoever he's affiliated with, he's instantly labeled a loony.
Yeah.
Whether he's telling the truth or not doesn't matter. That's just what happens to you.
Totally. We got some questions. I'm going to get to some questions here. What's your opinion of the tuck rule game? I mean, a lot of Raiders fans care about that. Historic.
I think that's one of those things that the NFL, they would rather have the Patriots win than the Raiders in that game. And so I think that tuck rule call was nonsense. I think it was clearly a fumble, and I think everybody knows it was a fumble. But the NFL in that year was after 9/11, and you got the Patriots into the Super Bowl, which was this whole rah, rah, yay, America pageant, and you needed the Patriots in there more than you needed the Raiders. So if you could push the Patriots in, the NFL was going to push them in because it went along with the whole storyline.
Right. No, totally. That's one of those things that hard for Raiders fans to forget. And now it's almost kind of like a joke, like in the NFL. Like even Brady, I think, has admitted that he thought it was rigged. And so once time passes, nobody even cares anymore, right?
No, and that's a lot of it. Yeah, again, that's the problem with the sports fans. They can be crazy upset about this call, and 2 weeks later be like, "What happened? Huh? Where?" I mean, it's even like say with the Gruden email and him getting fired after 2 wins. Who's our head coach? Does it matter? We just won 2 games. We're 5-2. We're top of the AFC West. Who cares?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised. I expected that, but I wasn't surprised when I saw Raiders fans stoked, even after, your head coach is totally targeted, gets fired, and then suddenly this interim head coach is the future. And I mean, he's great, and he's been there the whole time, despite the fact that I don't think any of us, and even you viewers out there, could think of one successful interim head coach in the past 30 years. Maybe Freddie Kitchens from the Browns, but even they didn't turn it around that year. But yeah, I mean, not looking at the chat here, we did talk about, here's one thing I want to talk about in particular, and this is something that's going on right now, which is Mahomes. Now, Mahomes, extremely successful. The NFL, I mean, they gave him this contract. It's $500 million, right? I mean, so like when you talk about people being protected by the NFL, I mean, this guy seems like he's right up their alley there, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I think he is. I think he was. I think this season, I mean, I've actually seen him play. He's making some insane choices in terms of what he's doing. He's turning the ball over like crazy. And that's something you can't totally, you can only throw defensive pass interference on those interceptions so often before people start going, come on, wait a minute. And some of them are just, he's throwing it just to basically the other team. I mean, it could be he's tired. It could be he's hurt. It could be that he's not getting protected because he seems to have to scramble and move around a lot with that offensive line. And so maybe, because it's an experienced offensive line and they're calling holding on his players, that he's not protected like he once was because the NFL doesn't want him again. They want somebody else. They need some new blood. And I think that's been kind of the thing recently in the NFL is it's a turnover. You have a lot of these guys, Phillip Rivers, Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger, these guys who've been on Drew Brees, guys who've been in the league for a long time who are the bread and butter guys, and they need to replace them. So now you have the Josh Allens, you have the Patrick Mahomes, you have the Kyler Murrays, and I think it's starting to swing toward those guys, not because they're young and necessarily better, but because that's where the ratings are, that's where the interest is. So they start protecting those guys, and these old guys kind of get pushed aside. And Mahomes has already been established as the star. He's already been established as one of the top players. So they don't need to protect him as much. they don't need him in the Super Bowl right now. They need to build up other players, other quarterbacks, especially.
Yeah, because that was going to be my follow-up question, but I think you already answered it, which is some people would maybe push back against you and say, oh, if the NFL is so rigged, wouldn't they help Mahomes this year, right? But you're saying,
but he's been in the past two Super Bowls, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you like to see? They got to build up some fresh blood, because then the NFL itself will tell you this. Their ratings are based on quarterbacks, because the quarterbacks are what they build up. Those are what the stars are, and that's why I think, as good as the Titans are and Derrick Henry, their quarterback's Tannehill. Nobody cares about Tannehill. And, running backs, whoop-de-doo, sure, get in the playoffs, but that's enough. They want the quarterbacks because those are the stars. And that's why I think, you could basically predict who's going to be the Super Bowl based off just the quarterbacks. Doesn't matter who's around them. It's based off the quarterbacks. And I think, like I say, Carr and the Raiders do have a chance, because Carr is kind of an interesting guy. But I don't know if he's enough alone to get him in the Super Bowl. But if you include the whole drama, which would be a great storyline to have an interim head coach get into the Super Bowl. You have the new stadium, which is also part of the deal. Then you can put together a whole slew of storylines in the Raiders' favor. Doesn't mean they'll get there, but you can write the headlines right now, can't you? In your head.
Right.
Doesn't take much.
That was the first thing that I actually said. I went live on this channel when Gruden resigned, and I said, wouldn't it be interesting? And maybe this is what the NFL will do, is that they can create this story where they got rid of their bigoted, un-PC, unwoke head coach.
Yeah.
And now that they got rid of, the racism and sexism, then now they're able to succeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Look at how they all came together as a team. And, that was the big thing. Actually, that's I didn't even think about that. That's actually genius, because that is something that's something you could totally hear and they would totally run with, and it wouldn't shock anybody.
And that's the one thing about politics. Some people are talking about in this chat, but do you think politics is entering the NFL? There's been promotion of, certain NGOs that clearly serve one political party, whatever. But do you think politics has an impact on the NFL? And do you think that's changed in recent time, or has it kind of always been that way?
I think it's changed recently. And I think it has. You go back to Colin Kaepernick and the kneeling for the, Star Spangled Banner thing. I don't think the NFL wants it in the game, but I think their hands kind of forced, because they allowed all those guys to put different things on the back of their helmets last year. And so, they do that much because it's kind of forced upon them to do that much.
Right.
But I think, again, this is the owners' league. They own it. They control it. They can do what they want. And obviously some of those guys are political people. Robert Kraft's clearly a political guy, and you clearly know where his interests lie.
Right.
So I think that's going to influence the league to a certain extent as well. So I think, I don't think they want to be, because they are entertainment and they don't want to lose half their viewing public because they have become so woke, or because they all lean to the right, whatever it is. But I think, their hand is forced to involve some of that.
Totally. I agree with that. Well, I'm glad that you came by to talk. I was going to look at the chat to see if anybody has more things to say. People are just making some comments about other people
hating me.
No, nobody's hating you. People actually really like, it seems like people like what you have to say.
See?
I don't know if you said you had to leave in an hour. Do you still have more time, or do you?
Yeah, I can just hang around for a little bit longer.
Hang around a little bit longer? Okay.
I've just, like I said, COVID's killed me fatigue wise.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of get sleepy. And I was in the hospital for a week back in September with it. And now a month later, I still have issues with energy.
Wow. That makes me scared to go outside.
Yeah,
but,
not to totally change subjects, but yeah, it was a thing.
Well, hopefully you get better soon and everything. You said you're making some progress, though. You feel a little bit better since then?
Yeah, again, not to make this a COVID conversation, but yeah, it's really weird. After I got out of the hospital and off oxygen, which I was only on oxygen out of the hospital for a couple of days, like I say, I have this fatigue issue, and it's been going on for about a month now. And I've heard people tell me anywhere, oh yeah, my brother had it or whatever. And I've heard stories that the fatigue lasts from 2 months to a year. And
Wow.
it's really rough, because I'll do out. I'm not young, but I'm not old either. And I went out and mowed the lawn the other day, which took me 45 minutes, and I had to take a 2.5 hour nap after, because I was just exhausted. Wow. And it's all related to that. So yeah, that's a little scary.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating too, because there's all the stuff I need to do, work I need to do, and I don't have it in me to do it. I got to do that much rest, and that's the way it goes.
Yeah, man, that's rough. I mean, I hope you feel better.
Thank
yeah,
you.
people need to stay safe. I mean, yeah, I haven't had it yet, so I've always been, and I don't really know many people who've had it, and to be honest. So it's always,
Well,
yeah,
again, not to make this a COVID talk, but it was funny. I went to my high school reunion, and there's only probably maybe 40 of us, because it was a small class to begin with. 40 of us at this little party at this bar, and 10 of us got COVID that night.
whoa.
So a quarter of the attendees wound up getting COVID, and I just was the worst one. I was the one who wound up in the hospital for whatever reason. So.
Oh man, that's crazy. I guess we can't party. Man, I guess I'm not gonna party next week. I thank you for your work. We've been able to expose the NFL for a long time, so we got some positive comments here. And this is another person kind of piggybacking what you were saying. Patriots had to win the year before 9/11.
Year of 9/11.
Year of 11. Yeah, I was kind of confused with that before. And someone else said something that they took their comment away. It said, "Do you think Gruden knew?" I don't know what they meant by that, but whenever you see things come out publicly about the NFL, for instance, these emails and everything, there's things going on in the background, right? So in your view, and then we know that the NFL had access to these emails of Gruden's in July, right? And so from your view, do you think Gruden already knew that these emails existed or could have prior to the start of the season?
Oh. Well, it's one of those things too. The emails were old.
Right, 10 years old.
I'm sure a lot of us have sent old, emails. We've forgotten some of the stuff we've written there, where if somebody came back 10 years later and said, "Hey, check this out," you'd be like, "Oh, yeah. I forgot I wrote that," So, he probably did know. It's funny. I think that he was working for ESPN at the time all that happened, too. And ESPN has said absolutely nothing about the fact that they had him as, the host of Monday Night Football for how long. And apparently he was sending all these racist and sensitive emails while he worked for them. And ESPN didn't have a clue about it, as woke as ESPN suddenly is now these days. So, they got off the hook for it. I don't know why, but they did. And now they're blasting the NFL and Gruden for what he said when he worked for them at the time. Right. Maybe you should look at yourself, ESPN. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? But it is interesting. He had to. It's one of those things too, which I find interesting about these emails, is and speculation. But who's to say the NFL didn't at some point go to Jon Gruden with the emails and say, "Hey, dude, do you want to play ball for us, or do you want us to release these emails?" And Jon Gruden said, "Screw you! I'm not doing what you want me to do." I know, basically another form of blackmail to get him potentially to manipulate games, fix games, whatever. Because wouldn't that be a great way of doing it?
I think that's true.
If you had a random player, and that's the thing, there's supposedly the one, I forget his name, the one Raiders player who's homosexual.
Carl Nassib.
So there's got to be more in the NFL, right? It has to be a lot of players. So all you got to do is if you were out in a bar and here's this NFL player and he's, drunk, whatever, and he's making out with another guy and you snap a couple pictures on your cell phone. And then, the next day you go, "Hey, you want me to make these public, or do you want to fix a game for us?" Right? And that's the way I've read in FBI files how players would get potentially blackmailed that way. The same with these emails. Who's to say they didn't come to Gruden and try to get him to do this, that, or the other thing before they made those public, and he wouldn't play ball. And he said, "Fine, fire me," or whatever, make it public. And that's why they released the one. And then nothing really happened. And then they released the more. And then he said, "Okay, you beat me. I'm out."
But
that's the whole thing.
Before they released the one on Friday, they admitted that, and Gruden and Mark Davis, of the owner of the Raiders, agreed they had already sent them to him before that Friday. Before they released the big lips, they already confirmed that they sent it to Gruden and the owner of the Raiders. So this blackmail thing that you're saying is not far-fetched, because they this is a straight up fact. They sent it to them, said, "What are you going to do?" And then they released it. They leaked it Friday. So
that's the thing is, who knows what was asked,
right?
If anything was asked. Again, like speculation that maybe nothing was asked, but at the same time, that's a perfect thing to hold over somebody's head, especially in this day and age. Insensitive words in an email, that it's going to come back to bite you in a serious way. What do? Do you want to keep it private? Do you want to make it public? What can you gain? What can you lose? You put it in someone's lap, and then you put something else over your head that you want from them, and you see what happens.
And that's another thing with the Urban Meyer situation. I mean,
yeah, that's very similar.
I mean, I have faith. I mean, I have faith in Urban Meyer that he's not that sloppy. He must have known he was in a safe bar. Maybe he was that sloppy. Maybe the person who filmed it, is affiliated with the NFL. You don't really know, right?
No.
But it is a perfect way to blackmail somebody.
And like I say, I'm actually shocked that more stuff like that doesn't come out. And especially with players, because they're out and about all the time doing this, that, or the other thing, partying after games and what have you.
They're young.
And I'm surprised that they're young, but I'm surprised there's not more guys who are married who here's a picture of you snuggling with this chick. And it might be totally innocent, but you get a picture with your arm around another woman and you're married, you got a kid at home or something. Again, do you want to make this public? You want to keep it quiet? What's it worth to you?
Right.
And I mean, like I say, there's got to be more things like this actually going on behind the scenes we never hear about.
Yeah, that is totally true. We never hear about it. There's got to be more. Hopefully one day we will. More former players will step up, but they don't really have an incentive, though. Like you're saying, that there's no incentive to sort of spill the beans in any sort.
No, and also too, people forget the NFL has their own security division, which is like their own FBI, and it literally is staffed with former members, the FBI, CIA, and those sorts of organizations whose job it is to keep these things quiet. I mean, they literally are. I mean, I'm not making it up. They literally are out there doing this sort of work. I mean, I interviewed the former head of NFL security a couple of years ago, and that's literally what he told me. Wow. Is that it was their job was to keep things quiet. And so that's what they do when something like this breaks. Actually, police forces know to call like the NFL security before they call like newspapers about certain things, so the NFL can swoop in and say none of this happened, and they can make it go away. Believe it or
not. Wow. Yeah. No, that's not surprising at all. But it's insane. Where not only is the FBI kind of already a sketchy layer in society, but obviously a corporation as large as the NFL is going to have their own FBI, a mini FBI.
Exactly.
I mean, this is a funny comment because I mean, I've read some of your stuff, and in Green Bay, I mean, how often have you seen Green Bay get some favorable calls?
Well, I live in Wisconsin, so I'm not a Green Bay fan. I actually hate the Packers mainly because I hate their fans. Because that's all that people care about in Wisconsin is the Packers. I swear to God, it's horrible. I mean, the nightly news is like, here's what happened in the Packer game. 4 people were killed downtown, but who cares because the Packers are playing, next week against this team. Here's the weather related to the Packers, and now we're on to sports, and here's the Packers. So I can't stand the Packers. But I think the Packers do get a lot of favorable calls because of Rodgers. And I think they got a lot of favorable calls because of, Favre at the same time. Because they were stars, and the NFL kind of protected them. I mean, I go back, and it was a few years now, but the Packers almost went undefeated. I think they wound up going 15-1. And at that time on my website, I actually tracked penalties. And the year the Packers went 15-1, they had 11 games where they did not have an offensive holding call against them. 11 games. Now, holding, as people say, could be called on every play, or at least every other play. They went 11 games without holding against them. Now, if your quarterback is protected like that for 11 games, how well do you think he's going to do?
You better do
darn well. Exactly. Yeah. And so, I mean, and I think there's, I think actually in that same year, I think Drew Brees had a great year, and they had something ridiculous like 8 games without offensive holding against them. And so, I mean, that's the sort of thing is a lot of people kind of forget as the games progress how often these penalties are called or not called, because certain ones will stick out, but a lot of them kind of fade into the background. But, how do you project that out? I mean, how do you, if you're somebody who wants to look at statistics and say, these are how many penalties are called, blah, 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 how do you, figure in calls that are not made? And that's the big thing, especially like in the NBA, it's the same thing. Well, we have all these metrics to determine referees and how often they call charging and blocking and blah, 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 blah. But how do you factor in not made calls, non-calls? And it's the same with the NFL. How do you factor in when referees are basically not doing their job? Because it's a subjective penalty holding, defensive pass interference, offensive pass interference. A lot of these calls are subjective. And if they just decide not to do anything about it, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You know, there was holding. There had to be holding going on in those 11 games that they didn't get flagged for it. But what are you going to do?
Right.
They didn't throw the flags.
And that's what the viewer can't really notice, the non-calls. Those are what matters the most, because I was saying this too regarding the Raiders when they won the next few games. I mean, they suddenly didn't get any holding calls. We do have Jon Gruden coming through talking to us, so he's saying, you guys talking about me, so I'm glad that you're here, John. Appreciate you coming by. Yeah, and you know, it's funny when we're talking about Green Bay.
You can chime in if you want.
Yeah, John, feel free to join the channel, man.
Get in.
Anyways, yeah, I saw a meme, I believe this was 2 years ago, where it was the Packers versus the Lions, and it was a terribly officiated game. And there was a meme where they had a referees doing the Lambeau leap inside, so they photoshopped him in.
Well, and again, I think that's part of it. I mean, you know, the Packers have been really successful because, granted, Aaron Rodgers is a great quarterback. And at the same time, the Packers division, the Bears, the Vikings, and Lions are terrible. And they've been terrible for quite some time. So, I mean, you give them almost like 6 guaranteed wins. They have a great quarterback. You know, they're kind of playoff bound almost by accident.
Right.
But then when you do factor in those certain, again, you talk about manipulating games. If the referees are in Aaron Rodgers and the Packers' favor because the league wants them to be, because they want Aaron Rodgers to succeed to a certain extent, well, then how do they fail? How do they, how do they not make the playoffs when you have those, certain things? And there, like I said, there are a lot of games where I've seen the Packers get away with bloody murder and not a penalty is called. And again, I don't think that's accidental. I think that's, like Michael Jordan was in the NBA, you couldn't touch him. You couldn't even breathe on the guy and you get a penalty, and it's, I think, the same with sometimes the Packers, same with Tom Brady a lot of times too. You just get the benefit of the doubt, whether it's deserved or not. But again, it's not strictly by the rule book officiating. It's like you always hear announcers say, wow, they're really letting the play out there. You have a rule book, right? You have certain rules that should be enforced. How can you just say they're really letting them play out there? Because that means the officials aren't doing their job, the rules aren't being followed, and yet here the game is still going on like there's nothing wrong. And I think, again, that's kind of proof to what I'm saying, is that these games are kind of manipulated because so many calls are subjective that a referee can determine, well, we want to focus on this, not worry about that. And then, well, you don't call holding for 10 straight plays, and on the 11th play you do. Well, why? Why suddenly do you do it now? And who did it affect? Why did it affect them? Did it take points off the board? Did it kill a drive? And those are things you kind of need to look out for.
That's a really good point. And it just reminds me, when you're talking about the subjectiveness of certain penalties, pass interference and roughing the passer, those are two ones where not only is it super subjective, but the penalty for it is insane. I mean, it's 15 yards and a first down, and with PI, you get the ball at the spot of the flag plus 15.
Spot of the foul of the first down.
I mean, unlike something that's objective, false start, offsides. These are objective things, but the penalty is only 5 yards.
And not an automatic first down. I mean, defensive holding is my favorite, because that one's 5 yards and yet an automatic first down for some reason. And again, I mean, it's again, you have to watch, like, when do these penalties come up? Because, I mean, certain times, like on defensive pass interference, whatever, sometimes guys get mugged and it's like, yeah, you have no choice but to call that. But the defensive holdings, I mean, some of those, the guy's cutting across the middle and the guy kind of just, has his hand on his shoulder and his jersey goes like that. But it doesn't impact his speed, doesn't impact his angle, doesn't impact the ball wasn't even being thrown to that guy. It was being thrown on the other side of the field. And yet that's a penalty. It gives him automatic first down, keeps the drive alive type of stuff. And that's the kind of crap that drives you insane as a fan, because it's subjective. And yet it's, like you say, it's so punitive that it alters games like snap of the fingers.
Right. Yeah, it's totally insane. And then when you top in instant replay, and this is somebody I've seen this guy in chat a lot. He's always very skeptical, saying the NFL is rigged. I know we touched on this a little earlier, but we did address this.
Is that Derek Carr, by the way, who just popped up?
Yeah, Guarb. I mean, do you know this person?
Derek Carr, like in the little.
Oh, yeah, he did pop. I didn't see that. What,
okay.
Was somebody subscribe?
I don't know. I just suddenly saw him pop up.
Okay.
Sorry, not to change subject. What's the question here?
Oh yeah. Whenever I get a new subscriber, that happened. Just talking about the Raiders, will they ever see a Super Bowl again? So, I mean, maybe not to talk about that, but just talking about the Raiders historically. Have you noticed that they've gotten the short end of the stick? Because I think the reason why my channel is open to this discussion about rigged NFL is because we are Raiders fans who've seen the short end of the stick the whole time.
Well, I think part of it was Al Davis. I really think the NFL hated, or a lot of the NFL owners hated Al Davis. I really think he was a problem. And I don't know how much of a problem his son is, but I know Al was a problem causer. I mean, you have to remember, going back to the AFL in the 1960s, he was the commissioner of the AFL, the rival league. And the other owners in the AFL literally conspired against Al Davis to make the merger happen between the two leagues. Al Davis, despite being the commissioner of that league and an owner in that league, they didn't tell him what was going on until it was basically a done deal. So, I mean, from that day forward, he kind of had it against the NFL because he felt he got screwed by his own league, in a sense, to become part of the NFL. And so, with him moving the team back and forth to Oakland and LA and all over the place, he did a lot of things that really irritated the NFL. And I think especially, again, from being a commissioner of the AFL to now having to be under Pete Rozelle and the NFL's control and Tagliabue's control, I don't think he liked them, and I don't think they liked him. And so, yeah, I think when the owners get together, and because, again, I think it's the owners who do kind of order this manipulation where and when it needs to happen. I think they were like, screw Al Davis, screw the Raiders, and, take it against them. I mean, the Raiders have always been the most penalized team, right? I mean, almost historically for 30, 40 years, they've been the most penalized team. And did that really mean they always played dirty? Maybe to an extent, but at the same time, again, talking about subjective penalties, do you let certain things go against certain teams, but you had to penalize the Raiders for them? Sure. Right. I think that's very possible. And I think one of the reasons, too, certain teams like the Lions and the Raiders, even Cleveland, why these teams don't see the success that other teams do is I think part of it is they don't get the help from the NFL because they don't have a reason to promote those teams. I think the reason the Lions have sucked for so long is they never had an Aaron Rodgers. They never had a Tom Brady. They never had a superstar type quarterback that the league could rally around and say, okay, this guy's a superstar. This guy's a storyline that we can push. I mean, even though like the Lions had Barry Sanders and he was a star and he got in the playoffs, but he wasn't that superstar like Dan Marino or John Elway or Joe Montana was. And I think that's, the same with the Raiders. They never had a superstar quarterback necessarily. I mean, since maybe Ken Stabler.
Right.
And that's a long, long time ago. So, I mean, if they wound up with some sort, if Aaron Rodgers had been a Raider, I think they would have had a lot more success. Not necessarily because Rodgers was good, but because of that kind of protection they give those superstar players.
Do you think things are that sort of petty, or do people hold on to grudges that long where, the
Al
merger
Davis did.
Yeah, Al Davis. So you're saying like even after his death, I mean, because hey, before Gruden was fired, the Raiders were second in penalty yards in the NFL. And then since he's been fired, or since Gruden's been fired or resigned, they're fourth now. So they're clearly getting less penalties. So do you think they would still hold on to those type of grudges after so many years?
Well, and that's the thing is, I don't know. His son, was it Mike Davis, right?
Mark, yeah.
Mark Davis, sorry. I don't know what his standing is in the league. I mean, I know he's kind of an oddball. But I don't know if they have that same grudge they did against Al.
Right.
So I don't know. It's hard to say because, like I said, I don't know. I know Al was hated. Mark, I don't know if it's the same thing, but potentially it is.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah.
But again, now with them being in Las Vegas and everything that's changed, they may look at him in a totally different light. Right.
Totally. And that's what some people, I mean, the reason why I was just asking is people are coming in and they're still asking, like, what's the prediction for the Raiders this season? And we talked about that earlier, but right. When we're talking about penalties, grudges against certain teams lacking a superstar, that has a huge impact. And maybe Jacksonville, the Jaguars, will do a lot better since they have the blondie from Clemson. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think I really do think that's a thing. Right. I mean, part of it is the player has to be talented. I mean, Tim Tebow wasn't talented, but the NFL tried to shove him down our throat for 8 weeks when he was on, the Broncos, and they did a really good job of it. And then they realized, look, we can't protect this dude in terms of, he's just not good. But,
Right.
and same with Johnny Football, Johnny Manziel, he just wasn't good. He wasn't NFL caliber. And that's the thing. I think that's why, like I say, the Browns, the Lions, Jacksonville, they've consistently failed because they just haven't been able to draft right and get lucky in the draft to find that superstar that the NFL and the TV networks can cling to. And Trevor Lawrence is a perfect example. I think that guy's really talented. And again, the talented will definitely make Jaguars better. But if he really catches on and becomes like lightning in a bottle for him, not necessarily as a player, but as almost like a personality, as a superstar type of thing, then I think you get the help from the NFL and then your team does better and you wind up in the playoffs. It's not necessarily the talent, but you have to have that talent for the league to help you out.
And that's the thing about Derek Carr not being a superstar, because when you talk about you talk about skill, but then you also talk about Lawrence in the sense of his image, right? And the thing about Derek Carr, I mean, he's the Christian guy. He's almost kind of like old timey in a certain way with his personality, right? I think back in the day, like maybe during the George W. Bush, Derek Carr would be charming, actually, to a lot of people, and he would be a superstar. But now you got superstars where it's Mahomes, it's Lamar Jackson, it's hip hop, right?
Yeah.
Now, do you think that really does affect Derek Carr, the fact that he's not hip?
I think it's part of it. I mean, I think it's why a lot of people don't necessarily know about him. He doesn't get that sort of press because there's nothing exciting about him. And I think that whole Christian Valley thing, I mean, I think that could play out for him this year. So I think that is something that they could potentially latch onto, especially like you talked about them coming together now that Gruden's gone as a team and rallying around Carr. Now you have this guy who's got this Christian image at the center and he's bringing the team together in a way. I think that is a great selling point, but it wasn't one that's a selling point 2 years ago. Right. It's not a selling point 3 years ago. It's a good selling point now. But again, with the woke culture type of thing, it's not exactly what they want to sell. But I don't think the NFL owners are exactly the woke culture type of guys. So they could rally around to David Carr in this type of situation, again, with all the other potential storylines around it, and make it a good story for a year. And then next year, cast him aside and be like, who's David Carr? What's this? Who cares?
Derek, that's always a mistake everybody makes.
And then go right back to being a 500 team.
Just like they're throwing Mahomes aside this year, because they don't need to make any more money to pay off those Arrowhead upgrades, and they've already made
he's an established dude who 10 years from now, assuming he doesn't get injured, he's still going to be a really talented, exciting player.
And he's going to bring in the money, bring in the ratings.
Yeah, I mean, he can have a down year, but they don't need him this year.
And that's another thing too, with the Derek Carr Christian thing. I know maybe like the Christian thing might not be all the rage today, culturally, but something that could be interesting.
Well, for some people it is, though.
For some people it's
life. I mean, that's
right. But I think with the LGBTQ, promotion of that equality in the NFL, it could be an interesting angle, and we could speculate on this, which is like tolerant Christians who are not homophobic. I mean, that's something I could see the NFL really marketing and latching onto if the Raiders do well this year.
And if Carr's willing to play along.
Yeah, exactly. If he's willing to play along. And we'll see. I mean,
I mean, and not even necessarily play along. I mean, that could be totally the way he is. I shouldn't put it that way. But yeah. Some of these athletes, I think you do kind of have to push and prod them to get them to do that type of PR stuff for the league.
So that's a double standard thing. Gruden, right? He says some bigoted thing in emails, but what are some other players? I don't know if it was your site that I was reading. It might have been yours in thefixesin.net. By the way, if you're just tuning in, check out Brian Tuohy, thefixesin.net. Link is in the description. Awesome site. I think it might have been you or somebody else showing that Deshaun Jackson quoted Hitler once on Twitter. I mean, maybe it wasn't you, it was somewhere else.
It wasn't on my site, but I remember seeing that. Yeah.
And so, okay, Gruden, he says these things, but quoting Hitler, I mean, there's got to be a punishment for that.
And not in a bad way, not in a negative way. It wasn't. I forget what the quote was, but it wasn't like Hitler said that and isn't he a jerk? It was like, hey, Hitler said this and he wasn't too bad for saying it. That's I don't know. Certain guys get away with certain. I mean, even though you have to kick Gruden out of the league for his emails, but Tyreek Hill, what did he do to his girlfriend? He beat her. He choked one in college. Who cares? Josh Gordon's been suspended how many times by the NFL for drugs? 6 times. And he's welcomed back right to the Chiefs. I mean,
on the Chiefs too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many athletes who you can point out who've done this, that, or the other thing, have been proven, who've been caught, been arrested for it, and they're not in trouble. But Jon Gruden said a couple bad things in an email, and he was public enemy number one. He needed to go now, not next week, not next month, now, because of 10-year-old emails.
Right.
Again, if you don't think that was sort of a witch hunt or something more was behind that, then you got to rethink what's going on.
Now, this comment is saying Aaron Rodgers is an open atheist, so being part of a religious group has nothing to do with it. Meanwhile, we should take this comment with a grain of salt because it is coming from a user whose name is Dark Atheist.
Well, the thing with Derek Carr being a Christian is, again, you can't necessarily appeal to all the people all the time. And again, there's got to be, I'm sure there is, a wide swath of NFL fans who are Christians who go to church on Sunday and then watch the games afterwards.
I would say a majority.
And like I say, look how big you have to go back to Tebow and how big Tebow got in that short period of time. I mean, people were, doing that Tebow pose and taking pictures and posting it all over social media. It was a huge thing for a short period of time, but it was huge. I mean, it was all over the place. And he's a devout Christian. He's a devout Catholic. I mean, and it's something that, I think the NFL played with. And I think it's something, again, that Derek Carr could bring to the forefront, which would benefit the NFL in a certain way.
Right.
So I don't think it should be pushed away. And maybe that's the reason Aaron Rodgers only won one Super Bowl is because he is an atheist. Who knows? Just saying.
That is a good point. He's actually here right now saying, Jesus who? So that Aaron Rodgers, he's not stopping with his skepticism and atheism. This secular guy.
Tell Aaron he wasn't that good of a host to Jeopardy. How's that feel?
Oh yeah, oh my God, yeah, he was I really hope he doesn't take over that job.
I mean, he lost out to Blossom. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, Rodgers was horrible. He ruined Jeopardy for me for this. And you know what? I like Rodgers actually. I think he's a good player. So people are saying
interesting dude.
Yeah, there have been
interesting dude.
Rodgers is an interesting dude.
Yeah. He's strange.
I have heard rumors about his sexuality. I mean, I don't want to get into people's. I have heard rumors about his sexuality, and I wonder, he is so talented. How has he only won one Super Bowl? And especially that they do help Green Bay out a lot. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Do you think maybe? I mean, we don't know that. We don't know for sure, but I guess I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there's something going on with he has a peculiar sexuality, and that's impacting
Well, again,
him.
Being from Wisconsin, I hear a lot more rumors to that regard, to that end.
Oh, really?
And I mean, you think about the women he's dated, like Danica Patrick and the two Hollywood stars now. I mean, it's one of those things like, the guy hasn't had really a steady girlfriend that seems like a legitimate steady girlfriend. And then there's all these pictures of him and his roommate. That was a guy that have been circulating around the internet for a while. I mean, and that's one of those things where, again, who's to say that's not something that they use against Aaron Rodgers, that they kind of blackmail him with?
Yeah,
it's something, if he doesn't want to make it public, and he doesn't seem to necessarily, if that's the way he is, he definitely doesn't want to make it public because he's had 3 fake girlfriends, at least.
Right.
But isn't that something you can hold over somebody's head to get him to do what you want him to do? And maybe that's why, like you say, the Packers keep losing in the playoffs, because he knows if he does the wrong thing, then his life's going to take a serious turn.
No, that's true. And then I have heard, these are my gay friends. My gay friends are the ones who tell me this, because they know more about this stuff than me. They're looking it up.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care either. It's just I happen here because I'm in Wisconsin, and it's something gets talked about all the time. They
have referred to his girlfriends that he's had. They've referred to them as beards, which means they're like meant to cover up. They're like classic beards where they've covered up other people in the past too.
Yes.
Which hey, I mean, that sucks that he can't just do what he wants to do, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's supposedly the whole rumor too as to why he doesn't get along with his family anymore, because they're devout Christians and he's gay and they can't deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So like Aaron Rodgers said earlier, Jesus who?
Yeah.
That is interesting to talk about though, because we're talking about this on this channel, and I don't ever hear anybody talk about that. I mean,
no.
I mean,
well, and again, because it's all speculation.
It is, yeah.
And so that's part of the thing is, you're guessing and you're making things up. And if he's not, then you just totally ruined his reputation. But at the same time, it's interesting to speculate because, again, it could lead to other things given the topic in the NFL and football games. And again, if you're a gambler or a member of organized crime and you had that sort of information that you could hold as leverage over somebody's head, you're going to use it and you're going to get him to fix the game. And he ain't never going to talk about it because, it's a whole different story. So why can't the NFL do the exact same thing if they wanted to?
Totally. Yeah. And that's the thing, though. A lot of people say, oh, you can't prove it. Like, you can't prove that games are manipulated, right? That's ultimately, with people, especially when I've seen you, like, on, famous, like, shows that support the NFL or in part funded by them, I feel like that's usually the default. But what kind of proof are people expecting? It's not like you're going to get a tape recording of, like, an owner saying, the game's rigged, or I fixed this call. Right.
Well, and the way I've come at it is, again, is if I could put together some proofs like we talked about earlier, how it's legal to fix games and how there's nothing, if the NFL wanted to or the NBA wanted to, they could do it perfectly legally. They're not breaking any laws, so they can get away with it. And, why wouldn't they? I mean, I always make the argument like McDonald's. If you were McDonald's and you could put this new FDA-approved additive to your hamburgers that make your hamburgers taste better with every bite, well, you'd put it in your hamburgers tomorrow, right? Because it's FDA approved, it's perfectly legal, and you're going to sell a lot more hamburgers if you do this. Well, that's the NFL and the NBA. It's perfectly legal to fix games, manipulate games if you wanted to, through your officiating, through your players, through whatever. So why wouldn't you do that? Because your product is the game. It's what people watch on TV. You're going to make the games more exciting as they consume them, as they're watching them. Why wouldn't you do that? Right. That's how you're going to make your money. They don't put these games on for free. Despite the fact that you may not have to pay to watch some of these games because it comes on your TV, it's not free. They're charging money to do this. They're all making hundreds of millions of dollars. The players are making money. The referees, the coaches, the owners, everybody's making money because it's televised. So why wouldn't you do this? I mean, if you're a business, that's the best business decision to make.
Yeah, no,
so
exactly.
That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, it's almost, I mean, it is rational in a sense. And so, like
it's very rational. It's irrational to say we're going to have a multi-billion-dollar business and we're just going to let whatever happens happen.
Yeah.
I mean, if we have a terrible season or we have one team win the Super Bowl 10 years in a row, oh well, so be it. Why would you do that if you're a business? I mean, no other business would operate in that way. But that's how we assume the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, and all these things just happen to happen the way it happens.
So I think that's insane. That's what the devil's advocate. I mean, playing devil's advocate. What they would say to you is like, oh well, if they really wanted to make it entertaining, why did they have Brady and the Patriots go to the Super Bowl almost every year for almost 10 years?
Well, and part of that is too, though. One, people love winners, right? I mean, how many like when the NBA was Michael Jordan, how many fans out there were Bulls fans and were Jordan fans? I mean, they estimated that over half of the people watching the NBA were watching because of Michael Jordan, because they loved him so much. And the other time, probably the other half were watching because they hated Michael Jordan. They wanted him to lose. And it's the same with Tom Brady, I think. I mean, here's a guy, talented, whatever, but there's a lot of people across the country who are big Tom Brady fans, especially obviously in Boston, now in Florida. And yet there's a lot of people out there who want him to lose, so they watch to want him to lose.
Guilty.
And so you build up that, you build up these dynasties because it builds a fan base, and at the same time it makes other people watch because they want to see that dynasty fall apart and they want to root for the Cinderella team. So I mean, yeah, it is sort of counterintuitive, but at the same time it's exactly what you need and want, because it builds up one thing and it creates another thing at the same time. Both are beneficial to your final bottom line.
Totally. Yeah. No, I mean, there is. Yeah, I actually was just wanting to hear what you said, explaining the logic of it. It still does make sense to boost ratings to have a dynasty, right? So that and Michael Jordan's a great example of that.
And like last year in the NFL, ratings were down across the board because, for whatever reason, because of the pandemic. The only team whose ratings were up every time they played was the Buccaneers.
Yeah.
Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. They were the only team all of last year that every time they played, the ratings for their games went up. And so, geez, isn't it a coincidence that they wound up playing in the Super Bowl? Geez, isn't that odd?
Before the season started,
it worked out for everybody.
Before the season started, I said it was Chiefs and Bucks. I mean, I thought last year was the most obvious that I've seen it. I don't know what you think, but I thought like
it seemed pretty telegraphed. I mean, to me,
yeah.
I mean, and again, you can always make the argument that, oh, well, those were the two best teams.
Right.
Sure, maybe. But at the same time, again, if it's any given Sunday and any team can win, why didn't get one of the two get knocked out in the playoffs? And if you go back historically and look at the teams that lost the NFC and the AFC championship games, many times you'd be hard pressed to make an argument that would say the two teams that lost would have made a better Super Bowl than the two teams that won. If you go back 15, 20 years and go through all of them, you'd be really hard pressed to say, okay, what would the storyline been? What would have been the big promotion if these two teams who lost have been playing in the Super Bowl as opposed to the two teams that did make the Super Bowl? And again, I say you'd be hard pressed to make a better argument for the losing teams to have been in than the winning teams.
Totally. So the alternative, if I'm not mistaken, just off the top of my head, would have been Bills versus Packers for the Super Bowl last year. Now that already doesn't sound as entertaining.
Not as much as Tom Brady and
versus Mahomes. Yeah. So yeah, that's a totally valid point. I mean, I'm wondering what people think. I mean, you aren't ruining the game for me in particular. I would say it's just an informed way to watch the game.
Well, and that's exactly it. I don't mean to ruin it for people. I just want fans to realize what they're consuming and understand what's really going on. That again, you look at it one way as a fan, you put your fan hat on, and it's a sport. And I think a lot of times people project themselves into those roles and say, man, if I was lucky enough to be an NFL player, if I was lucky enough to be Tom Brady, I would do what they do. I'd give 110%, blah, 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 blah. But I want fans to look at it as being, okay, this is a multi-billion-dollar business that's literally financed by the 5 biggest media companies in the United States. And the only reason they exist is because they get that money from TV. So it's really an entertainment product. And because it's an entertainment product, it's really no different than a circus, from a ballet, from professional wrestling. It's all a created entertainment entity. And so because it can legally be manipulated, again, what's the best business decision? To allow it to just be happenstance and random, or to control it as much as you can to get the best outcomes that are going to make people watch and make you more money?
Yeah.
That's what businesses would do.
And it is very hard for people to argue against that. I think when people hear what you have to say, it's very hard to argue against it.
Well, and part of it is it depends what you're a fan of. I mean, if the Raiders won the Super Bowl and I said, look, the Raiders won because they got the new stadium, because a lot of Raiders fans would be like, whoa, hell no. They won because they're the best team and blah, blah, blah. And so a lot of it too is when you attack something somebody loves, then it changes. If you're an NFL fan and I said, oh, the NBA's rigged and they, give things to LeBron James and you don't like the NBA, you'd be more apt to be like, yeah, I could totally see that. That totally makes sense. And then I turn around and say, and the same thing happens in the NFL, then you get the pushback.
Right.
So part of it is what you care about and how much it means to you is how well you're willing to accept this idea. And that's a big part of it, is to get, like I said, get past being a fan and use your logic and say, maybe there's something going on here.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm in a peculiar situation, because this Gruden thing has sort of changed my mind about the NFL. And I'm saying, as a Raiders fan, that they're going to rig it for the Raiders this year. I mean, we've made that pretty clear throughout this hour. And so I'm just going to give it to the viewers from my personal opinion and my personal prediction. I'm going to call it now. I do think the Raiders will go to the AFC Championship. I do think their offensive line will get significantly better with a lack of holding calls right on them. And I can totally see them going deep this year. So I just want to throw my prediction out there just so people make sure they hear it. Because, I mean, people are still...
Put it on record, yeah.
I'm going to put it on the record.
Put it on the record.
Do you have any predictions or storylines that you think you could see happening in the NFL this year? Or have you just...
I think not specific ones. COVID, to be honest, I didn't pay attention to a lot of stuff for a while.
Totally.
I was kind of knocked silly by that. But, I think you can look at the NFL and you could pick maybe 10 teams that are really contenders. 5 from each division. Without, top of your head, and again, you want to say it's because of talent or whatever, but in the NFC, it's like, it's going to be the Rams, it's going to be the Cowboys, it's going to be the Buccaneers, it's probably going to be the Packers, and I missed one team. There's one other team. Oh, and the Cardinals.
Oh, yeah.
One of those 5 teams are probably going to be in the Super Bowl.
Right.
And you can make a storyline and you can make a lot of things just out of those 5 teams without fact. So the other, 12 teams, 10 teams, 12 teams. What am I thinking? But anyway, they're just also rats. They're just kind of in the mix, and who cares? And I think in the AFC you can do the same thing. It's, it's probably the Bills. It's probably It's probably the Raiders. It's probably the Chargers.
The Chiefs could turn it around.
Chiefs, potentially.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, it's just a handful of teams that matter. And I mean, you can see it in the media itself that these are the only teams they care about. Right. And the other teams are, who cares? And so it's going to come down to probably, like I say, 10 teams and what's the best story you can make out of it and who survives injuries. Because, you know, if like Josh Allen, his knee blows out next week, the Bills are wiped off the board because nobody's going to care about the Bills without Josh Allen.
Oh, yeah. And the NFL would not make any money. Yeah.
No, and they wouldn't help them in any way, shape, or form. And it's the same with a lot of teams. You know, if Aaron Rodgers, same thing. His arm falls off next week. See you, Packers. You're done.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't matter anymore.
And again, it's part of it is the talent, but part of it is what makes for an interesting story.
Yeah, this is a funny comment. You have to go back to high school football to watch a legit game. Now I'm like rough. I'm 30 years old, so I'm not going to go to a high school ever watch a high school football game to watch a legit game. But just thought that was really funny to see. And maybe, I don't know, maybe Brian, are those fixed too?
Well, you know, to a certain extent, you know, you've heard of hometown referees, right?
Oh,
I mean, that happens. And I mean, even, you know, certain high schools recruit players. You know, it's probably the most legit, sure. But at the same time, I mean, like the high school I went to, we had a guy who wound up playing in the NBA on our basketball team. The only reason he was at that school was to play basketball. Okay. That was the only reason he was there. Somebody paid his tuition to come in to our high school to play basketball. So really, even though our high school I don't think they went to the state finals, but they went pretty far in the state tournament because of him. That's the only reason we were there is because that guy was so good and somebody paid for him to be on our team. So in a way, was that legitimate?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Totally.
But I'm sure that happens in high school football too. So, you know, I mean, that's the same thing with sports is really, you could go into corruption. I mean, Little League World Series, we've already seen where, you know, Chicago a few years ago had that team that was illegally constructed. And before that, they had that Daniel Alamonte guy who was like 2 years too old to be pitching, but they allowed him to pitch anyway, which is why he was striking everybody out. I mean,
I think that,
you know, that's the scary thing about sports is a lot of people are always willing to cheat to win.
That's like, I think that movie Benchwarmers kind of made fun of that. Like they had somebody sub in for their like Little League team who's like a 40-year-old Puerto Rican guy.
Yeah, it's not surprising. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's hilarious though. Damn, Pop Warner. LOL, is everything rigged? Okay, it's just funny little comments. Well,
it's true in a way. I mean,
yeah,
if there's money, there's corruption, right? I mean, we've kind of proven that in the world. If there's money involved, corruption follows. So again, that's the same thing with sports. There's billions of dollars at stake. $12 billion a year, I think the NFL makes now. And you think that's all going to be legit, no problem, money? You don't think there's corruption involved in there somewhere? Again,
totally.
Use your head.
We just have to hope it goes corrupted in our favor, right? Of wherever your heart lies, right? So
yeah, exactly. If the corruption's in favor of your team, like the Patriots for so long, who cares? Great.
Lambeau
the
Leap.
NFL's rigged.
Lambeau
Leap. Love it. It's great.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, dang, I'm glad that you came by to talk to us. I'd love to have you on in the future. People love what you have to say. There's even other people I saw in the chat who said they've been, paying attention to your work for several years, and so hopefully we get to see more of it. Hopefully you feel a little better from COVID. That's really rough and everything.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, let's put it this way: if the Raiders make it to the playoffs, then we should talk again. Let's see.
Oh, if the Raiders make it to the playoffs, we're going to talk again. Totally. Yeah. We have to.
We can revisit all this and see what happens.
Yeah. That'd be awesome. Well, hey, thank you, Brian, for coming by. Thank you for everybody in the chat. Remember to like this video to boost us in the algorithm, because hopefully YouTube doesn't try to shut this video down after all the shit we've said.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me either. So, in fact, this might be your last broadcast. I might just be the end of it for you. So, I apologize ahead of time if that's what happens.
Yeah, we'll see how well this one does in the algorithm. But hey, you know what? We put it out there. Some people heard it and whatnot. So, thank you for coming by. And Brian, remember to check it out, everybody. thefixesin.net. Great site. You can see him updating his coverage of the season this year, and it's great stuff. I mean, we just showed that little video of the Kyler Murray roughing the passer thing, and it's great content that I know all you guys will like to see. So make sure you guys check that out. And Brian, thank you for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you. All right, everybody. Check him out at thefixesin.net. we're going to be doing a lot more stuff covering sort of these games that we think are a little skeptical. We'll be taking a closer look, and then hopefully we'll be able to have Brian on soon to talk about the Raiders going deep after they got rid of their bigoted coach, right? Now that they're woke, they're going to be successful. But hey, like some people are saying in here, make sure to like this video and boost it, man. Like, share, and subscribe. We really are fueled by you guys, right? And I'll see you guys on the next one. This has been WiFiWillie. See you later.